Chapter 2 The Old World. Uriel had woken up this morning in the old world. Despite the little difference in his personal life from this timeline divergence, he could feel it. There was a cold, stagnant energy to this place. He had built his own log house with his grandfather when he was young. It was their project to work on together whenever he went out to the farm. When he was younger, his parents had lived in the city for a few years, hoping to live what is now mockingly known as the American fantasy. It used to be the American dream, but the majority of North Americans decided it was in fact a fantasy. These trips to the farm, though, were filled with adventure and endless possibilities. Uriel's grandfather was the old-school sort that kept everything in case he needed it one day. There was a stuff forest filled with every possible useful thing you could imagine. This was a point of divergence for Uriel. In the New World, his grandfather was praised for recycling and making use of materials again. However, in this old world, his grandfather was constantly being harassed by government officials. They didn't like the way it looked from the satellite view, in case tourists were remotely viewing the area. His grandfather was a tall beast of an old man, though, and didn't appreciate being told what he could have on his land. If it wasn't here, it would be in a pile at the landfill, he reasoned. Better here where we can make use of it. Uriel seriously admired his grandfather. It seemed like his huge hands could do anything. It was his grandfather that had built the majority of the structure of his house. They spent a summer together working on it every day. Uriel's parents loved the change they saw in him and decided to move back to the farm. Uriel's mom had lived here growing up, but moved to the city with Uriel's father when they finished school. For her, it was moving back, but for Uriel's father, he had fallen prey to the urban lifestyle over the last decade. Grandpa called it gone soft, then started mumbling something about most kids these days. Uriel enjoyed how he said most, because he knew he was the exception. Uriel's grandmother was pretty intense too. On the surface, she looked like a deceptively large woman, draped in layers of fabric with a head poking out. Under the fabric, she was a tall, slender woman. She had the same joyous energy in both time divergences and helped Uriel manage his travel between the two. She consulted the universe constantly, but it was unknown what action was to be taken on Uriel's part in either timeline to fix it. She would tell him sometimes, you just need to know why. You can't change the situation, but if you understand why, it makes it a lot easier to process. Before Uriel was born, his grandmother had tried repeatedly to share positive change with the world. She had been a taxidermist, and in the old world, this was frowned upon, as there were massive reality differences between people which created hate fractures. When the time divergence occurred, a planetary energy fractured fueled by fear, hate, greed, and jealousy ripped the human consciousness into infinite shards of fractals. Separated beyond imaginable repair, the human mind could no longer relate to another. Small pockets of humans remained, though. Grandma said we could still relate to each other because when the energy fracture happened, some chose to be like liquid light, and liquid cannot fracture. This shift in the time divergent realities was an energetic stark contrast. In the New World, when people made the choice to change and care, those who looked inward found their light. They became like liquid light, flowing around obstacles, leaving no shadow. Not all found their inner light, of course, as some sought external validation of belief. They asked the AI what was truth. They listened to others' opinions of the world. Some sought organized religion and began a payment plan guaranteed to please the Lord. These people still existed, but became minority pockets of carbon-based life forms. They had hardened with pressure and could not withstand the energetic fracturing. With the majority having become a unified consciousness like liquid light, they held together these small pockets of fractured realities. This was Grandma's explanation. The old world had decided this lack of empathy in mankind was the result of decades of chemical poisoning of our species. Neurologists found that the mirror neurons in those without empathy had crystallized like their pineal gland. The mirror neurons were in fact fractured in those individuals. It could have been overexposure to screens or blue light, possibly even Wi-Fi. No one actually knew the answer to this, at least not publicly. Those who resided in cities were especially prone to fractured mirror neurons. They didn't want to call themselves sociopaths, as it had a negative historical label. There was no known cure or repair, so they were to be accepted as they were and continue making decisions from their positions of power. It was, of course, the wealthy who experienced this tragic apathy, as throughout their lives they had made choices that chose money and power over empathy. How else could one amass such wealth when the people of the world were suffering so terribly? The ownership of power had taken a very physical form by 2055, with the entire world requiring more power than it could produce. It was decided the most deserving of power would be the ones receiving the majority of what could be produced. Businesses and corporations had power demands, and to keep the economy running, the machines must be fed. The cities needed the most power, and those who could afford to live there were never without. Out on Uriel's farm, his grandfather had created what he called a redundant system. There was solar power, wind power, manual gear power, and a variety of experimental power attempts. There we go. Other young people of Uriel's age hated their ancestors, almost every one of them. They were blamed for all the problems of the present age. They had led the planet to this point of despair and never taught them how to fix it. Like children being left alone in a decrepit house, they were incapable of fixing problems beyond their understanding. They had been disillusioned for so long by the American fantasy. When the bubble popped, there was nothing left for them to do than point the blame. It became highly publicized underground that the world had been warned for years. Highlighted newsreels circulated from the 1970s onwards, telling that the United Nations warned of a need for sustainable development. Resources would run out and the future would be doomed if they didn't change their ways. There had been so much content created in the past showing the contrast in lives and beginning of the apathy. There was news describing the genocides and emergency situations around the world. Drought, flash floods, fires, hurricanes, mudslides. It was an endless list of pain and suffering. Yet there were others who lived a life of fabricated luxury and shared endless photos and videos of new products they acquired cheaply through slave labor. Uriel loved his grandparents and recognized they lived through a time when people's only choice was endless custom options of poison. It was difficult for people to step outside of this consumerism mentality. The problem was, overall, it was no longer greedy people preying on their vulnerable. They had created machines to do that, with an overall goal of learning an individual's habits and targeting their weaknesses. Uriel's grandparents chose differently, though. They lived in a small community that cared for 40 acres of land in the mountains. Living sustainably is a way of life. It is choosing differently than the fabricated luxury most choose. This was a huge yet minor shift that occurred between the two timelines. In the New World, not everyone chose to be a steward of the land. Many individuals followed progress online of viral videos from the communities being built. By watching the education process and seeing the stewards create positive change in the world, people began to make changes in their own lives. There was a viral challenge to create new ways to reuse water to get as much use as possible. Ideas flowed that were heard by others. Food gardens became so common in the New World, there were always large gatherings to process what had been grown that year. A lot of the food was harvested and sent to be processed into easily transported foodstuffs for communities that were still getting established. Uriel was working on cutting some vegetables to make dinner for the family. His mind frequently wandered to the New World while in the Old World. It was better to think of that and maintain hope that one day he would learn how to make the New World a concrete reality for all.